The sharingan, one of the most overall broken concepts in anime history. A concept that gives a person crazy abilities, enhanced visual perception, the opportunity to copy other techniques, etc., etc. All of you know how crazy the sharingan is. One would even argue that the sharingan as a whole is even more broken than the rinnegan, despite the rinnegan being an evolution of the sharingan. Now, the brokenness of the sharingan varies from user to user, but we can all agree that each ability provides each user a busted ability beyond belief. For example, black flames that can burn through fire itself, the ability to control someone's actions without them even knowing that they're being controlled, or even a giant ethereal avatar that acts as the most solid defense. I think I'm starting to sound redundant. Today, we aren't talking about the brokenness of the sharingan, but rather the possible plot hole that is Obito or Obito's sharingan. Now, I say possible plot hole with careful treading because there are a lot of defenses you can make for Obito's sharingan as a whole being a broken plot device. For one thing, there are a ton of plot holes in Naruto that people are either okay with or at the very least rarely ever complain about. For example, the fact that Kakashi got a substantial power-up, so to speak, before the war arc, and that Kishimoto gave him a blessing of a chakra buff in order to combat people like Obito and the Biju. However, with plot devices that were introduced even before Obito made his debut having a reasonable restraint or consequence, it does beg the question as to why Obito rarely, if ever, got the same treatment. First, I'll give some examples of what I believe are reasonable restraints or consequences. For one thing, we all know that the more that someone uses their Mangekyou Sharingan, the quicker that they go blind. The best examples shown to us, in my opinion, are Itachi and Sasuke. First, let's go with Itachi. Itachi rarely ever uses Mangekyou Sharingan, mainly because with most opponents he rarely ever needed to. When dealing with opponents as troublesome as Kakashi or Jiraiya, however, he tends to use it to end the fight quickly by one-shotting in the case of Kakashi, or escaping in the case of Jiraiya. In his fight with Sasuke, however, is when we actually saw Itachi use his Mangekyou Sharingan the most. That is, when it came to cost, unlike his Edo Tensei counterpart. In that fight, Itachi spammed his MS abilities such as Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and the Susanoo, which impressively enough he was doing when he was already going blind. Meaning that from the time that he awakened his MS to the moment he died, Itachi had paid the consequences for using his MS abilities, but didn't start going blind till near the beginning of Shippuden, which implies he rarely ever used it. The second example is Sasuke, specifically the 5 Kage Summit. As we all know, this was Sasuke at arguably his most reckless. Now, of course, in order to fight against 5 Kage back-to-back, as well as Kakashi and Naruto briefly, someone like Sasuke would definitely need to use the best of what he's got at his disposal. That being said, almost immediately after he invaded the 5 Kage Summit, he was balls to the wall spamming his MS, using Amaterasu, Flame Control, and of course Susanoo. The fight between the Raikage, Mizukage, Onoki, and Gar collectively didn't last for more than an hour or so, and Sasuke was already starting to feel the effects of overusing his MS. And not too long after that, he started to actually go blind, which again just speaks to how conservative Itachi was when it came to using it. The last and quicker example I'll use is Kakashi. After we saw Kakashi using his MS for the first time in Shippuden, he was even more reluctant to use it than Itachi was when he was using his MS. Of course, that is due to his consequences being a lot more dire for him as opposed to being an Uchiha, as using it just a couple of times in the beginning earned him a one-way ticket to the hospital for a week. But even as he got more used to the effects of the Mangekyou Sharingan, the repeated uses of it in the war arc could be comparable to Sasuke's usage of it in the 5 Kage Summit arc, since by the time Madara became the Ten Tails, even Kakashi was starting to go blind. I do feel like I'm getting off the beaten path here. How does this apply to Obito? Well, when applying everything I just mentioned to Obito and comparing it, it's a bit unfair. Obito's usage of the MS exceeds Itachi's and Sasuke's put together. If we assume Obito was around 14 to 15 years old when he awakened his Mangekyou Sharingan against the Blood Mist Village, and use what we saw in the series when Obito was on screen, plus take into account the possible uses of his MS during the 17 plus years after he fought Minato with his MS, altogether that gives Obito around 20 plus years off and on usage of the Mangekyou Sharingan, which in all honesty may even exceed Madara's usage of the Mangekyou Sharingan in the Warring States period. You can make a case that Madara using his MS was only for about a year or less, since he had constantly fought Hashirama in the Warring States period, and to fight a monster like Hashirama, he would definitely need to use his MS, at least for the majority of the fights with him. And from what it seemed, it wasn't too long after he acquired the MS that Madara started to go blind and was needing Izuna's eyes for the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan. In short, Obito might have the highest record of the MS usage in the series, which may not seem that crazy or unfair, but again, when you take into account everything I've just mentioned, it almost seems Kishimoto gave Obito some kind of special treatment because, as most of you know, unlike the other characters I just mentioned, Obito Obito never went blind. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining about Obito or hating on him. In fact, he's one of my favorite characters. And I realize that since he's one of the final villains of the series, he needs to be powerful and difficult to beat. So I'm not faulting Kishimoto for making Obito, or more specifically, Obito's Sharingan so broken. Now, I know there's some people probably typing in the comments, Snow, there is a complete, clear explanation for why Obito never goes blind. And yes, I am fully aware that half of Obito's body is made of Hashirama cells, and that the Hashirama cells keep him from going blind. So in that case, could we say the Hashirama cells are the real plot hole when it comes to Obito? Well, yes and no. Yes, because it seems like to be a very reoccurring and convenient plot device at times, and according to my knowledge, there's no concrete explanation of how the Hashirama cells specifically affect Obito, or rather his luxury of never going blind. But also no, because you could make a good explanation for it. Since it was established that Hashirama cells can be a great source of healing, you could make a case that the cells constantly heal and repair Obito's Sharingan each time he uses it. In other words, it's almost as if the Sharingan never gets damaged, which would explain why we never see Obito's eye bleeding until the Kaguya fight, or that he never mentions how his cells are hurting like Sasuke did in the 5 Kage Summon arc. Especially since, again, half of his body is comprised of Hashirama cells, so the effects are maybe a little bit more potent because of that. So we can't really say the Hashirama cells are a plot hole, however extremely convenient they are, but we can in fact say there's a plot hole derived from Hashirama cells, Madara. Not so much Madara himself, but more so what he does and how he does it. Namely, how he managed to save Obito. So looking back and both reading the manga and watching the anime, it is shown that the cave that Kakashi, Rin, and Obito were in when they fought the Stone Ninja was completely collapsed. We even see Obito's face being closed in on as he inner monologues to himself about how he wished he had more time. According to Madara, Obito's body must have slipped through, and that's when Madara found him, which does raise a couple questions. 1. How long after the collapse did Madara choose to find and rescue Obito? With half his body being completely crushed, and assuming he lost a good amount of blood, Obito should have been dead before Madara could even get to him. And with many of the deaths in this series being caused by simple baseline attacks or stabs, it seems very unlikely that Obito could have lived for much longer after having half his body under a huge boulder. The second question is, even if we completely ignore his crazy rescue, how could Madara even get to Obito in the first place? From what Madara told Obito, he was tethered to the Geto statue, and that if he wasn't, he'd surely be dead, implying that he can't really go far before he detaches himself from the statue. The only two explanations from that is either 1, he may have had Zetsu temporarily attach himself to his body, similar to how he had done with Obito, but if that was the case, then why wouldn't he have just done that from the get-go instead of constantly being tethered to the Geto statue? The second one you can say is that when Madara said that he had found Obito and rescued him, he may have specifically meant that Zetsu was the one that found him and rescued him. But if that was the case, I'm sure that Zetsu probably would have just made a sly, funny comment on how he was the one that saved him. Again, I know there's plenty of plot holes in this series that could easily be overlooked for the sake of making the series better or more interesting, and maybe even add some mystery to it. And I'm not necessarily knocking this one as terrible, but as it applies to one of the final bosses and villains, and arguably the biggest plot point in the series, it is one that's easy to look at and ponder. I mean, of course, I realize that Obito had to be alive for the Kakashi plot point in the later war arc, and the fact that he's the one that planned every single thing in the Akatsuki. So I get it, he had to be alive, but it's one of those things where like maybe Kishimoto couldn't, think of something that would realistically be able to save Obito from all the rocks. So it's one of those things that maybe he just thought that we would overlook. So really all that is to say is that I don't think Obito or even Obito's Sharingan or Kamui are plot holes. They definitely do seem like it because of how extremely convenient they are, but in all actuality, it's Obito's rescue that is the plot hole. If not for that, he would not have been persuaded by Madara, he would not have seen Kakashi kill Rin, he would not have unlocked the Monkey Sharingan, he wouldn't have gained an extremely broken jutsu that is Kamui, he wouldn't have attacked the elite village, and wouldn't have terrorized the world. I'm sounding redundant, but you get the idea. All that said, I really do like Obito as a character and as a villain. I'm really glad we got him as a more predominant character within the series. It's just the brokenness of Kamui got me thinking of it as if it was a major plot hole, and through tracing it back to the Hashirama cells and the whole Madara stuff, I kind of came to the realization that it's not so much Kamui or Obito never going blind that's the plot hole, it's his rescue. Still, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what y'all think. Do y'all think I'm reaching with this conclusion, or am I right on the money? Do you still think Obito's immunity to blindness was a plot hole or not? Do you think it's completely reasonable? Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys, my subscribers. Y'all are amazing. Like the video if you haven't already. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And just to see more content. And until the next one, like Snow, out.